Hello, friends. Welcome back to the While We're Waiting Hope After Child Loss podcast. I'm Jill Sullivan, your host and one of the co-founders of the While We're Waiting ministry. This is a podcast of stories of devastating loss and grief and heartbreak and struggle, and stories of hope and healing and faith and, yes, even joy. Underlying every conversation is the hope we have in Jesus Christ, which makes it possible to not just survive the loss of a child, but to live well while we're waiting to see them again in heaven one day. You can learn more about our ministry and the free bereaved parent retreats we host by visiting our website at www.whilewe'rewaiting.org. Welcome to episode number 206. Before we get into our conversation, I just wanted to say a quick word of thanks to those who have recently left ratings or reviews of the podcast. It's a blessing to me to read reviews like the one Christy wrote a few weeks ago. She said, "I recently lost my son and was not ready to go to counseling or a grief group. This has been such a blessing. To know that it's possible to go on and eventually be joyful again is priceless. Thank you so much." It's such an encouragement to me to hear that the stories we share on this podcast are helpful to you. Today's guest is my new friend, Joni Robbins, who has recently released a book titled In Grief, A Mother's Fight to Choose Joy. She lives in Eastern North Carolina and is the wife of Chad and the mom of Anson and Ethan. Ethan was her gentle giant, a friend to many who dreamed of being in law enforcement someday. He died at the age of 17 in a tragic accident in their home in the spring of 2021. In this first half of our two-part conversation, Joni shares who Ethan was and talks about the incident that took his life and the impact it had on her marriage. Be sure and come back next week because we'll be extending our conversation to cover a wide variety of very practical topics related to child loss. Hi, Joni. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me. I have enjoyed these for the last almost about 3 years ago. I found out about your podcast.
Yeah, well, good. I'm glad that it's been a blessing to you. And I feel like I've gotten to know you just a little bit by reading your book. But let's start by giving you an opportunity to tell the listeners a little bit about yourself.
Okay. Yeah. So my husband, Chad, and I have been married almost 26 years now. And we live in a small town, which actually is growing a little bit in Eastern North Carolina. He's only ever lived here. We love our little town, small town friendly, everybody knows everybody kind of thing. We had 2 boys and they were best buddies. And even though they were almost about 4 years apart, people would often say, were they twins when they were little? Because our oldest was pretty average in size. And our youngest, Ethan, who we'll be talking about today, he was just always way bigger and more mature than his age. And I was a hairdresser for a good part of our marriage. And then in 2007, I discovered the world of direct sales, and that just fit better with our family so that I could be the mom that I wanted to be. And in 2012, Chad actually retired from the phone company, and he was able to sort of be a stay-at-home dad. We both worked in our direct sales company, but I did a little more than he did. So we both got so much time to be at home and to kind of vacation together. We would do work vacations where it was work and also fun at the same time. And the boys got to go with us. We homeschooled for 5 of those years. It was so wonderful. And then in 2017, I felt the Lord calling me to do something a little more, less travel and a little more at home. The boys were middle school and high school, starting to play football, and I started a real estate career. And I felt like God told me there was a reason for me to do this. And looking back, it makes so much sense because we were all able to spend so much time together. We purchased a small gym in 2017, and that's become our now only child, Anson. It's become his life. He's living his dream. He's living his best life, running the gym, and he's done a bodybuilding competition, and that's just where he's found his outlet, is in the gym. And we're so happy for him that he can be doing something he loves, And we have a couple rental houses, and we always have things going on. We're very busy. I love to garden. I love being on the praise team at church. I now am in charge of the children's activities, all the children's services at our we call it our Nashville, North Carolina campus for our church. And that keeps me going. And we love our dogs. We probably fundraise more than we actually work right now, which is a little backwards, but it's what keeps us sane. So if you can imagine, we've turned puppies into fundraisers. Yes, we have. It's a long story, but that's pretty much what we do. So.
Yeah, sounds like you've got a lot of things to keep you busy, but you're able to enjoy a lot of family time. That's good.
Yeah, we are.
Yeah. All right. So you mentioned Ethan, and we're here today to talk about Ethan in particular. Help us get to know him a little bit. Tell us who Ethan was.
Yeah, so he was he was the best baby, and Anson was quite difficult. Our oldest was quite difficult. So he was always so good from sleeping to just his behavior. He was a very good child. I called him a gentle giant because he was huge. By the time he was 12, he was 6 foot tall and about 200 pounds. He wasn't even 200 pounds when he passed away, but we had a little struggle there with him and weight for a while, but he outgrew it. He was always the one that people would come and talk to when they had problems. A lot of times girls would walk in and I'm like, oh my gosh, Ethan, I would read him the riot act. He's like, Mom, they're just coming to talk to me because they've broken up with their boyfriend or boyfriend dumped them or something. And they just want to, he was just a person that, and even for me, there was a time in 2020 when I didn't have a relationship with my dad for the last, almost 30 years. And my dad, I found out through Facebook that he had cancer. So I wanted to go help him. And Ethan went with me on those trips, and he was the one I could you could just tell him all your stuff. He was very quiet, very soft-spoken, a better listener than a talker. So he was kind of all of our confidant. Like he was our sounding board, the best advice ever. Sometimes I would go to him and say, maybe he was 15 or 16. I need some advice. And I realize you're kind of young, but you always have the best advice. So just sit here with me and, let me talk through this and you just tell me what you think. He's like, Mom, you're crazy. I'm only this age. And I'm like, but I'm telling you have the best advice. He loved to fish. That was probably one of his most favorite things ever. He did play golf. We do a big golf tournament. Chad loved golf more than Ethan did. He was left-handed. And we had to figure out when he was probably in, I don't know, 8th, 9th grade, that he needed left-handed clubs. He would do some things left-handed, but for the most part, he would throw a ball and things right-handed. But that was fun. And I think if he had lived longer, I think he would have gotten really good at golf. He was always good at whatever he did. Ethan loved acoustic and electric, but he didn't maybe have the as much willpower as Anson did, but he was definitely naturally talented. Natural talent, didn't have to try too hard. Unlike Anson, who's always the one who his willpower just gets him there. They both loved music. He was writing a song when he died, actually. And so music was a big part of his life. And he loved four-wheelers. And he really wanted to be in law enforcement. That was from the day he could talk. He would always say, children, what do you want to be when you grow up? And he would always say, I want to be a police. And as he got older, I would say, Ethan, I don't know can't you think of something else? And when we were doing his driver education, when he was through with all the driving hours he had to have with the instructor, the guy said, I always have the kids try to back up through the cone. He said, most of them can't do it. And I can't remember how many he said could do it. I want to say in 11 years, only 4 kids had ever done it. And he said he was the 4th. And he just said he would do so good in a career that required great hand-eye coordination and just thinking fast. He said, I think he would make a great law enforcement officer. And Ethan looked over at me and said, see, Mom, I was just born to do this. And I thought, at that point, God just gave me the peace that whatever he was going to do, that, I just didn't have enough control to keep him in a bubble and save him, that I just needed to stop worrying about what he wanted to do. Because, we would try to come up with things like, well, why don't you want to do this instead and do that? And he would just always go back to, I just want to be law enforcement. So he didn't quite get to it. It got canceled because of 2020, but he got invited to some big I don't know, leadership training for people that were going to go into that field in Washington, D.C., but it got canceled because of COVID. But he was really looking forward to that until it got squished. So he was a lot of fun. He was very quiet, always had friends around. He had a smile that would light up a room, and he was a friend to many.
Yeah. What a great thing to be, a friend to many. That's always a great commentary about a person's personality. So talk about what happened with Ethan in the spring of 2021.
Yeah, so we'd had a busy day. Chad and I had gone around together. I think we had 3 or 4 listing appointments that day. We'd had a late lunch at our favorite little restaurant in town, and we texted Ethan and said, we knew he was here studying, and we said, do you want something? We'll bring you back something. He said, yeah, cheese pizza. And I knew his one friend who went to the School of Science and Math was helping him with algebra, because it was, we were still dealing with the ramifications of online learning, and he was struggling big time in Algebra 2, which he needed to pass this exam, so he didn't have to go to summer school. And I'm sure I put too much pressure on that, like, most moms do. And when we knew when we knew she was here, we, headed on back, and I came and sat down, and Chad went over to the neighbor's house, and I remember Chad walked up and gave him the pizza. And I want to tell something that was a little bit ironic from that morning. I thought it was exam day. I didn't realize it was just a study day. And maybe all mamas do it, but on exam day, like, I want you to have a really good breakfast, and I want you to feel like, you're not going into an exam on an empty stomach, So I made him this beautiful breakfast. We just had a baby shower here the Saturday before. I had everything set out really pretty. I still have a picture of it because, you got to take a picture of a pretty plate. And I remember just sitting next to him while he ate at the bar and just being with him. I don't remember what I said. I'm sure we talked some, but I just remember being with him and getting that time. So fast forward to that day, I guess it was late in the evening. I guess it was around 7:30, somewhere around there. And I just finished a phone call. It was a phone call about real estate. And I heard there was a pool table. So he was in our bonus room, and there was a bed up there that would kind of be like our guest room, sort of. And he had kind of taken it over like as his room. He had a bedroom down here, but a lot of times he would just stay up there. So I heard the pool table, I could hear the balls clashing. And I also found out there was 4 girls here instead of 1. And so I was kind of worried, like, they're really not going to study. And I was like, I need to go up there and tell them to stop playing pool. They need to study. And then I just thought, you know what? They've been through so much. They've not had a whole lot of time together because of COVID, and just let them have fun. And then what felt like just seconds, or maybe it was minutes later, I hear this big thud. And I'm thinking, that just can't be what I think that was. There's no way. And I start to hear, we have 2 Australian Shepherds, and I start to hear Levi and Elsie barking and girls screaming. And I'm like glued to the couch, and I'm thinking, I can't get up. This can't be real. If I don't get up, it's not real. It's just, I probably didn't sit there very long, but it felt like I was just glued to the couch. And I finally thought, well, I've got to walk up there. And so as I was walking up, they were walking down. And one of the girls just said, I said, what happened? What happened? What happened? And one of them said, Ethan was playing. He didn't mean, it was an accident. And he accidentally shot himself. And I'm like, oh gosh. So I run upstairs, and in true Joni fashion, this happens every time something bad happens. I seem to throw my phone or don't have my phone. And I'm somebody who carries my phone everywhere except for when I need it. And I throw my phone. I guess I'm so distraught. And he was laying on the ground, or, on the floor. Didn't look like he looked okay. I mean, I didn't see any blood or anything. And in my mind, he had just maybe nicked himself just a little bit, and he was going to be okay. So I'm praying and thinking somebody's going to come to me. And I don't know how much time goes by, but nobody really came super fast. So I did realize, that it was a head wound, and I was holding his head, trying to stop the bleeding, and was on the back side. So I decided I better go get some help, because I didn't know where the girls went. I didn't know if they got in their car. I just didn't know. And time is just a weird thing at this point. You don't know anything. So I ran downstairs, ran out the porch and started screaming. And Chad heard me. He was across the street at the neighbors, and they came over. Chad called 911, started doing, I was trying to do CPR too, but then the lady told him just to do chest compressions. So he was doing those. And then when EMS got here, it was hardly no time. We quickly got out of the way. We did not want to be in the way of anything, any help that he needed. And I remember the young guy looked at me and he said, he didn't say it until other people came. And he said, "Ma'am, he's gone." And I said, "You're not going to even try to take him to the hospital?" And he said, "Ma'am, you don't want him this way." So to kind of circle back to what actually happened, I don't know the full details. You might think this is crazy. I've never really asked, I have asked the full details, but I've never asked the girls because I don't want the girls to feel like I'm in any way blaming them, because I'm just not going to do that. I wouldn't do that. But, what I feel happened was he had, back in Black Friday, the Thanksgiving before, we got a new gun safe, and all the guns got moved out of our home into another location. And it was a huge safe. Like, you can't just, you could never just pick it up and take it. And Ethan told Chad, because, he's got his little law enforcement brain, and he's thinking, what are we going to do if we have a robber? And at this time, there's riots everywhere, and not really where we live in small town friendly, but, they're all thinking, well, if anybody comes, they're not going to come in this house, And he says, "Can I just keep my 22 in my room, and we'll keep the pieces separate? I won't even know where the bullets are or anything. But if something happens, I can grab one part and you can grab the other." So for whatever reason, this gun becomes known, and I guess the girl screamed or whatever, and he said, the magazine's not even in it. It can't hurt you. Look. And he puts it to his head and pulled the trigger. And when I tell you this is nothing my son would have ever done, and people can say all day long, my son would never do that, my child would never do that, mine would have never done that. If I would have told him the day before, "Hey, somebody just did this," he'd like, "They're crazy. Why would they ever do that?" We don't know why he did that. But in talking to other people that have lost loved ones, whether it be something they did on the road while they were driving, something they did, like 3 young men were in a factory like that their families owned, and they knew they couldn't do a certain thing because of carbon monoxide. But this one day, none of the 3 of them realized what they've just done, and they all died. And I just think I hear it over and over again that sometimes, and I believe, just God knows our days. He ordained those days before we were born. I do not know why some people live longer than others. Isaiah 57:1 sometimes, tells us that sometimes people go before their time. Maybe there's something that worse could have happened to them and God's sparing them from that. I'm not sure. I don't know. But all I know is over and over again, I hear that people sometimes do things they would never do. And maybe that was just because it was just their day, And that's what allows me to sleep at night and to wake up in the morning without scream crying. Is I just go, that was his day, and God knew that was his day. And I would have rather had him for those 17 years and 3 months and how many ever days than to never have him at all. And we did struggle having him, and I always wanted a huge family. My mother, who did not raise me, was one of 6, and I just always loved how there were so many people always around at that side of the family when I would go over there and visit. And I always thought I wanted a huge family. Well, we had a miscarriage before Anson, but it was, short, quick. He was the next month. I was pregnant with him. Not a big deal. And then we wanted our boys really close together, wanted kids close together. And we had to work really hard. I had to do some fertility drugs and different things to get Ethan here. And we do believe Ethan was a twin, but we lost the twin. But it was so early, I can't say that I was upset. And it would have been cool to have twins, but I had a live baby, and I was going to have my second child. And then, because Anson was quite difficult, we just never, so his older brother was quite difficult. We never really said, okay, let's get back on fertility drugs again. Let's try to have another child. We were just so thankful and grateful that God had given us 2 boys. And we just kind of, went forward. I still have all my baby stuff because when we moved into this house in 2012, I guess was I 32 then or 37? I can't even think. I think I was 37. I had an aunt who had her first child at 40 and her second at 45. So I always thought, oh, you might not be too old, but I just never really tried, I'll say. But we really wanted a big family, and that just wasn't what God chose to give us. But I'm so thankful that He did give us Ethan, So I try to think on that. Some people, we had a home health nurse here the other day, and she was actually here when the books came in, and I ended up sending her home with a book. She was pregnant with twins and lost them at 8 months old, and she never had any more children. So I just try to think about how thankful I am, not only that I had Ethan for over 17 years, but we still have Anson, and he'll be 24 next month. So as tragic as everything is, he had a beautiful life, and he was a great person. And we're going to do everything we can to keep his memory alive. And, not so much what happened to him. A lot of people, and we'll talk about this later, I know, but a lot of people wanted us to do things about gun safety. And I'll never forget Chad and I looking at each other when we were basically in a planning meeting for some fundraisers. And I said, is this how you want Ethan to be remembered? He said, nope. And I looked at the people and said, I'm so thankful for you guys that you're willing to do this, but this is not what we want. Ethan did know gun safety. I mean, he took hunter safety classes as soon as he probably could when he was little. He hunted, he fished, he desperately wanted to be law enforcement. Like, he would shoot skeet. It wasn't like he didn't know these things. He just did something crazy. And teenagers do it all the time. And some people do these things and they live because it's just, it's not their time to go, right? But I hope that kind of answered that question as far as what happened on May 17th, 2021.
Absolutely. So you go from, this is just a normal day. Ethan's getting ready to, school is getting ready to be out, about to start into a summer. And rather than planning a summer vacation, now you're planning a funeral.
Right.
And I know in your book, you talk about how much you dreaded going to Ethan's funeral. Talk about that just a little bit.
I don't know if everybody else is like me, but sometimes you think about, because you see it happen to somebody else and you think, what would I do if that happened to me? And a friend of ours lost their son, who was actually Anson's age. He was their middle child, not too long before Ethan passed away. And I remember being at the funeral, and he favored Ethan a lot. They both kind of had the same hair. And I felt like God spoke to me that day and told me, one day you might have to go through this. And of course you think, no. But at the very same church that I was sitting, that's the very same church that we had Ethan's funeral. They had all gone to preschool there. Those people actually were members there, but we had our funeral there because our church couldn't hold it. And I remember thinking, God, if one of my boys died, I'd go in my closet and I wouldn't come out. I'd scream. I'd just sit there and scream. And we all think that. And I mean, how many times have people come to you and said, oh, Jill, I couldn't have gone through what you've gone through? Yes, you could. Because you don't get a choice.
That's right.
You have to.
You have to.
And unless you want to be bitter and hide for the rest of your life, you have to learn how to do life again, And we had started a life group in the middle of COVID when life groups had stopped. And we just decided on Friday nights we were getting together. We had had enough of not having community with our local believers. And we would have 30, 40, 50 people a week in this house on a Friday night. And those were the people. There were more, but those were the core group of people who got us through those early days, probably a year at least. And if it weren't for our friends, I mean, how do you get your slideshow together? They're coming at you. You've got a slideshow. First thing you get a phone call about organ donation, and you're like, oh my gosh, and you have to pick out clothes, and it's just things that no parent should ever have to do. And I remember that that morning just thinking, well, the morning of the visitation, I can't get through this. I'm like, God, I need some of that peace that everybody talks about, that peace that passes all understanding, because I'm sure from Monday to Saturday, I doubt I put on any makeup. I'm sure I had on shorts and a t-shirt. I don't think I could even wear, if you cry in your contacts too much and you can't see.
Yes.
I don't know that I had my contacts in, and I didn't have the good glasses to wear out in public. I didn't know what I was going to do. And I just said, God, I need that peace. And when I did receive that peace, and I felt the Holy Spirit speak to me and said, this is not going to be forever, but you're going to get through this. And y'all, I did. I even had someone in our family say, kind of a derogatory comment about how could she be so friendly and talkative during this receiving line. We probably had, I know everybody didn't get to see us. I don't remember what time we started the receiving line for we call it a wake here, but it's still not a wake. It's like the visitation that we do before. And it was at the preschool, the school that our kids had gone to for preschool, and Anson went to kindergarten there. We stood there for hours and received these people. And y'all, I know that their hearts were probably hurting more than mine at the time, because God had given me that peace, and I could feel their hearts aching as they came up to hug me, and I was okay. And I was able to talk to people. I'm sure I cried. That was probably at about the point that my tears dried up, because, at some point you won't have tears anymore because your body's trying to keep it from dehydrating. But at the day of the funeral, it was hard to get ready for both. I'm not going to lie, like putting on makeup to decide, okay, I'm going to stop the tears long enough to put on makeup. That was hard. But we were able to get ourselves together to get in that church. And y'all, I praised God during that funeral. The worship team, was on, at the time, I think I sang every Sunday. So I was part of several different teams, but I feel like everybody from all my teams was there. And we had his Bible teacher was there. He was also his guitar teacher. And Ethan had he kind of made up a funny award called the Good Father Award. And he gave it to Ethan in 8th grade because none of the other kids knew how to play guitar, and Ethan already did. And they were learning Good Father. And Ethan played it so many times for so many kids to help them that he just made a joke out of that. So his name was Mr. Maines. I hope it's okay to say, he wouldn't care. He came and sang that. So he led with our praise team. He led Good Father. And, we did, I Can Only Imagine, and we did Reckless Love. And I think they did one song warming up, and I pretty much think it was Yes, I Will. And we sang it yesterday at church. And when I was singing it with the guy who led it that day, and I thought, I know why he chose this song now. I had kind of always wondered, why did he choose this song? And it just hit me yesterday because of the words, It was fitting to kind of open up with that. And we praised God, because we praised God for the time we had and for the testimony that precedes it, There were people that day at that funeral that gave their life to Christ. He didn't believe in God anymore. Some things had happened to him. And he said, I just don't know that I can believe in God anymore. And I talked to him, and I was praying that one of our neighbors ended up joining that church. And I had a conversation with him a few months prior, maybe a year prior, I'm not sure, that he would one day find God. And when he gave his testimony at that very church, we were there to see him baptized. But he said that was his deciding factor, was Ethan's death. And Ethan loved him. His name is Dave. And Ethan was the best gift giver, and I am not. So if it was Father's Day or Chad's birthday, he always had the best ideas for gifts. And he wanted to get Chad a pellet grill when pellet grills were just getting popular. And we went and picked out a pellet grill. And he said, we've got to get, he was putting it together. He said, why don't we call Mr. Dave and see if he'll come help us put it together? And Dave and him fished a lot. So I know one day Ethan's going to see Dave in heaven. And he's going to know that, because of his life, the life he lived, that somebody else chose Jesus. And now they get to spend eternity in heaven. So it was hard, but we got through it. God gave us the peace that passes all understanding because it makes no sense. And we praised God. We praised him in that service. And I'm so thankful that that was how we were able to react during that funeral.
Yes, that's a gift. That is a gift. And it's such a testimony to those who were there and saw you praising and worshiping at your son's funeral. That can be life-changing for people. And it sounds like it was for this one gentleman. And what a blessing that is. All right, so you have a chapter in your book called The Grave Truth, in which you kind of describe your relationship with Ethan's grave. Again, that's something I can relate to because that's a hard place for me to be. Talk about the grave truth for you.
Yeah, so we chose a normal gravesite burial with a cemetery plot not far from where we live, and it's just never been a place that I like to go. We went out there when we had the graveside service, and our worship leader at the time sang Chris Tomlin's Amazing Grace with Our Chains Are Gone. It was beautiful. But it's just nothing I've ever, when I go out there, at first I would try to go out because I felt like you had to, but I could feel the Holy Spirit just telling me, Joni, he's not there. If this hurts you, if this makes you not feel good, you don't have to go. He's just not there. Yes, his physical earthly body is there, but his soul is not there. And that's who he really is, and people will go and say, they went to talk to their loved one. But what I like to do instead is I like to say, Jesus, especially in the early days, I'd love to tell Ethan this. And if you see it's fit, tell him this and give him a big hug for me, because I can talk to Jesus. I can't talk to Ethan. He's not earthside. I can't talk to him anymore. And I'm okay with that, because if he could hear the things I said and I would say to him, he would be sad. And there's no tears in heaven. There's no sadness in heaven. I believe he's having so much fun. And if he could come back, he wouldn't. He'd say, Mom, you'll be here in a minute, But a grave site to me is just sadness. It's, we do a Bloomin' Festival every year in our town at Mother's Day weekend, and our church does a float. And they had to park that float, when you're lining up, and it was just at the point where we were waiting for all the people to go before us, and that thing was parked right by Ethan's grave, and actually Chad's mom's as well. She died just a little bit after he did, and I didn't like looking at it, but the one thing I did tell everybody, I said, I don't know if they do this everywhere, but at our cemetery, they always point or make sure that the graves, the people, are facing east for the rapture. And so I told the story about, how everybody in this graveyard, they're all facing east. So when the rapture happens and the dead in Christ shall rise, they'll be facing Jesus. I said, so that's what I'm going to focus on right now. And I just don't let it bother me. I do have flowers delivered. I have a wonderful friend who owns a florist, and she delivers flowers when the seasons change, and she sends us a bill. And we just don't really go out. It's just not a place that I feel like brings me peace or helps me in any way. It kind of sets me back. And that for me is just what I choose to do. Now, if somebody else is listening and they find peace and comfort by going to a grave, then by all means, go to that grave and do what you'd like. But if you're like me and you feel guilty, don't go. You don't have to.
Yep. No need to feel guilty about that one way or the other,
Right.
because everybody is different about that. But I'm like you. I don't get comfort from going there, and so I rarely go. And when I do, it's just a very hard place for me to be. But I do know there are others who get a lot of comfort from being at their children's graves, and that's just fine too. But like you said, I just don't want people to feel guilty either way.
Mm-hmm. That's right. That's right.
So one of the things that you wrote about in your book was the struggle with wanting a better or different or easier explanation of what happened to Ethan. How have you worked through that?
That's been hard. And I would say we just had to deal with the third anniversary of his death. Why do we even call it anniversary? There's got to be a better word for that, but May 17th, and today when I'm here is May 20th, and it's hard. Didn't think it would be this hard 3 years in, but it is. And I can almost tell the story now without tears. I used to couldn't tell it without like hyperventilating, crying. And writing the book was really what did that. I saved it for last. It's in the beginning of the book, actually, but I wrote it last. It was the very last thing I wrote. And I had help from some wonderful editors. Jody and Rachel were amazing at Blue Hat, and I probably would have never gotten it out there. I probably would have just kept it to myself. I had a lot of blog posts. I had a lot of things. I would write to Ethan in a Facebook group that I have called Remembering Ethan Robbins. I would write to him knowing, and I would tell people, hey, I know he cannot read this. I know he's not going to be sitting here reading this. Nobody's going to tell him this is here. But for me, that was a way of healing, because you miss talking to your child, And so in the early days, I would say, well, Ethan, we did this today and we did that yesterday. It was just a way to heal. And I thought, I just want to write this down, and I want to get my story out there of how I can survive, how I can choose joy. And I don't know if we're going to go over this later, so I'm going to tell this now. Ethan's Bible teacher in 10th grade asked them to pick their life verse. And normally they don't get asked till they're seniors to pick their life verse. And his was Romans 15:13. And I think we will talk about this later. But for me, when he first passed away and Mr. Maines brought us his Bible journal, which was such a blessing to have Ethan's Bible journal, right? And I can't promise you that I've read every page because I haven't. It's just been hard. But they were studying Romans, and this was in 11th grade. We were actually studying Romans. But when Mr. Maines gives me his life verse from 10th grade, he had chosen his life verse to be out of Romans. And we just kind of started researching it, and everything was like, choose joy, choose joy. And I just knew right then and there that through all of this, God wanted me to choose joy, and he didn't want me to bury myself in my sorrow, which we're all going to a little bit, and we all have our time, and we all have our days. But I just knew that if I had to get away, that I could tell people, because people ask what happened. Now when I know when somebody's lost a child, or, goodness, if they lose a grandmother, I won't even ask what happened, because I'm scared that it's so traumatic for them. For some people, I don't think it is so bad, but with mine, how Ethan died, it's like instant guilt, shame, regret. And I thought we were alone. But even my friends that have had kids that were lost to car wrecks, which is, the number one way a teenager's going to die is a car wreck, like your daughter with cancer, most people still blame themselves somehow, some way. Either they should have noticed it sooner. They should have, maybe they had a fever and they didn't take them to the doctor immediately. Whatever, they're going to blame themselves. They're going to blame other people. They're going to feel all this guilt. They're going to feel shame. They're going to feel all these things that I'm sitting back going, well, they have no reason to feel any guilt and shame because of their situation. Their situation was so, not their fault, how could you ever? But I've learned that they all feel that way. So really the book was what got me through it. Once I wrote it down on paper, and I did share it with one of the girls that was with him, and I said, is this even, am I on base here with what I'm writing? And she said, from your perspective, yes, that's exactly what you saw. And I said, do I need to add anything? Do I need to take anything away? And she said, I think it's perfect. So I'm sure I could have gone into more detail from other people's perspective, but I didn't. And I've learned to kind of keep it close. If someone asks, I'll tell them. But when someone else has lost a child and they're feeling, because, a lot of people lose their children to overdoses and things like that. And then they have all these feelings of guilt and shame. With them, I want to, they quickly tell you that. And I like to kind of jump in and say, my child didn't die from an overdose, but let me tell you what happened. And I think you'll see that, we have some things in common, and we have the same feelings. They're different, but we have the same feelings. And they seem to just open up and feel like I'm not alone. I'm not the only parent. For the longest time, somebody would ask me parenting advice, and I would look at them and think, Are you crazy? I couldn't keep one of mine alive. Why would you ask me parenting advice? And so now I still have that hot thought in my brain, but I just go on and give them my advice anyway, because obviously they wanted if they asked. They thought I was a halfway decent parent. But I do think that. And I think, wow, why would you want to know that? But the main thing for me about just being comfortable with it was getting it on paper and writing it down. And I question it. Like, I'm still nervous today. People are going to get that book in their hands today. And people that didn't know what happened are going to read it. And they're going to read it fast. It's like, second or third chapter. And I'm very nervous about what they're going to say. Are they going to feel like, we were bad parents? Are they going to feel like, oh, I feel sorry for her? What are they going to feel? But I feel like God definitely told me to write it. He was definitely with me through the whole process. There was one night, and if you've ever written a book, you know what writer's block is. It's real. And a lot of times it happens when you're almost at the end and you've got a really good part of the book done, but you have to somehow close it up. Like, it's not finished. It's just going to be an abrupt stop. I started writing that afternoon. And I told Chad, I said, like, I'm on a roll. Just let me go. Like, don't talk to me. Just let me write. And time came and went. Like, he went to bed. He probably brought me dinner, like, in my lap. And I looked up and it was like 4:00 in the morning. And I thought, I'm not tired. I'm going to keep going. I'm not going to stop. So I finished up at about 6:30. And I told Chad, I crawled in bed and I'm like, I'm just going to sleep now. Just like, let me lay here. I need to sleep some. And it's like the Holy Spirit just gave me the words to write. And now that was not what happened because I waited till the end to do that. But I got so much material, much of which probably didn't even get used in the book. Maybe I'll have it for later. But it was the best, most healing process to write it all down. And now just to have something to share with others that you're not alone. And it was much shorter than what I wanted, but I think that was all on purpose because I know I was given so many books in the beginning. There was no way I was going to read a 500-page book, even a 300-page book. My book's 100 pages, and it has some pictures. So I think people that, they can kind of get through it. And I've already gotten feedback from some, especially the other day, one was a lady who lost her child probably about 15, 20 years ago. He was a little bit older than Ethan, but not much. And she told her daughter, she's like, I think I'm finally starting to heal all these years later. And this lady's in her 80s, 70s or 80s. Yeah, I'm trying to think of the timeline of how, I know her father, I know how old her dad is. So maybe her mom's not quite as old as her dad, but she's older. And she's like, my mom's finally starting to heal because of this book. And so the second that the publishers and I started talking, I'm like, I don't know how this stuff works. Like, when is this book actually going to be out? And they said, well, how soon could you get your manuscript? And I told them a date. And I'm like, okay. And I said, well, how long from that? And they said, well, mid to late May. And I said, oh, that book's going to be here on May 17th.
Perfect timing.
And on May 15th, the books arrived, 2,000 books. And then on May 17th, the bubble mailers and the packaging, like the stickers, the mailing stickers arrived. So all day long I worked on books. I worked on signing books, and everyone that, once I realized how ironic is this, it's 3 years to the date, I started putting the date on all the books that I signed. I mean, not all of them were signed, but I just was like, thank you, God. Like, thank you for giving me the gift of being busy today. Because if you're not busy, you're sad, you're sadder. And so that to me was just like confirmation that, you know what, God's going to use this. And he definitely blessed me with that book being here on that day.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really neat that it's that day. That's really, really cool.
Mm-hmm.
So at our retreats, we often talk about how men and women grieve differently. And I know just from reading your book that you and Chad grieved quite differently. And that forgiveness was an issue for you guys. And there were just some very serious issues. How have you walked through that?
Well, it was hard, and we've talked to our church about this, and they did an interview with us. And I want to say it was like 2 hours long. And, they pull out like 5 minutes of it, and all of it's about our relationship. And I was shocked that that's what people wanted to really hear about. I'm pretty sure this did not make the book. One of Chad's dad's friends came up to us at the visitation and said they'd lost a daughter, their only daughter. They had 4 children, 3 boys and a girl, and his wife never got over it. And when I say get over it, you never get over it, but you should be able to get through it, and you should be able to still be able to function as a normal person at some point, And she just chose to stay in the bed, and she just told him she wanted to die and she didn't want to go on. And he's like, we have 3 boys. And she's like, I can't. And she kept telling him, you just need to leave me and move on. You just need to leave me and move on. And she ended up dying, I think, from maybe a heart. I don't know. But he said, don't let that happen to you. And he told me this statistic. He said, do you know that 93% of marriages will fail after the loss of a child? And I thought, well, no. And he said, you got to be the 7%. Well, that was very well meaning, but guess what? That statistic is not true. It's not true.
That's exactly right.
And so I walked around for I don't know how long, really until I started writing the book. I didn't figure out that was not true. And I just walked around already defeated because I kept saying, I've got to be the 7%. I've got to be the 7%. And like I had this big battle ahead of me to be the 7%, when the truth of the matter is, and you know better than I do, what is the truth? What is it, like less than 16% of people that aren't Christians and maybe 4% of people that are Christians? Is that somewhere close?
Yeah, I don't know the exact numbers, but I know that you are actually more likely to stay together after the loss of a child than not. Although with the caveat that if there are serious issues in the marriage before the child passes away, then yes, I mean, those are going to be accentuated. But yeah, the loss of a child is not a death knell to your marriage.
I just felt like it was. And that was the enemy. I mean, the guy was well-meaning. He didn't, and you can go, if you just Google it, like you'll find the original study that somehow says that, but just one study can be so flawed. And I just walked around defeated, like, how is this going to go down? Like, oh, is he just going to find somebody else? Am I just not going to be able to get out of this funk? Because I was talking to a friend about this today. I'm not trying to downplay the grief that a man, that a father, that a husband has, but they just seem to be inherently stronger than women emotionally. I think that's the way God designed us. Chad could always go to the grocery store. He could do the things. He was able to go to a Christmas party before I could. He could just do all the things. And where I couldn't, I would just crumble. And it's not that he wasn't grieving, because he would. And he would grieve every night, just like, in the early stages, we'd wake up to the sound. I'd wake up to the sound of him crying in the middle of the night. He'd wake up to the sound of me crying in the middle of the night. We'd cry every morning when we woke up, every night when we went to sleep. So we both grieved, but for some reason he could hold it together to get out and get the things done that had to be done. And I just kind of stayed in my house and didn't want to go anywhere. I could go to church. I was okay with that. But the main thing that people did wrong, so if you're listening to this and you're a pastor or you're just even a friend of somebody, you're going to probably have somebody that's going to lose a child at some point in your sphere of influence. Don't separate the mom and dad, because that's what they did to us. Everybody swooped in. The guys took Chad and the girls took me, and we have a fairly big property. So it was always like the guys are over here, and we would go all day long. For weeks, people were here with us all day, and we'd go all day long. I'm with my girlfriends. He's with the guys. And he was also off doing the things that had to happen because I was over here falling apart. Didn't really know how to talk about things and to grieve together. And I wish I knew exactly when. I think I wrote in the book about the turtle, but we have snapping turtles here. And the street we live on is called Duck Pond Road. And we were like, we have 2 ponds, one on each side of us. And when the boys were little, we raised ducks as part of our homeschool stuff one time. And we were just like, many times we've tried to raise ducks, and the snapping turtles always get them. So if we get snapping turtles, we try to either rehome them or unalive them. So a few days before Ethan passed away, he had unalived a turtle. That's a weird, everybody's using that phrase now, and it sounds good, I guess. And in my mind, he had used that 22 instead of another one that we'd have had here. And I just, instead of asking him early on, like maybe day 1 or 2, which would have been really smart. But again, he's over there and I'm over here. Like pretty much the guys had him outside in the garage or something. And the girls all had me here in the living room. I should have just asked him, but it was just festering inside of me. And what I thought was that he had used that gun to kill the turtle. And that, and if y'all don't know what a snapping turtle is, I mean, they kill everything. It's not a box turtle or anything like that. But I just thought that's what he did. And so finally I asked him, and when I first asked him, he was very angry about it. He walked away. And then finally one day he just comes to me, and I don't know if it was that same day. I don't know if it was a week later or a day later. I don't think it was long, maybe a few hours. He comes to me and just in tears says, "I'm sorry." And I'm like, "It's not your fault. You would have never done anything to hurt Ethan." Now, I loved Ethan more than anything. I mean, of course, him and Anson equally. But Chad and Ethan were close. They did all the stuff together. Ethan had this older Tahoe that they had found in mint condition, and they do all the stuff to it. The speakers and the tires and I don't know what all the stuff they did. But they had 4-wheelers, and they would buy a 4-wheeler. They wouldn't buy them brand new. They'd buy them older, and they would start to put new tires on them and polish them and replace parts, and they would build their own snorkels and different stuff. So they were always doing something together. And I just don't, he was a boy, so I didn't have those kind of things to do with him. So Ethan was truly Chad's best friend. And, as much as a father can be a best friend to a child. And
sure.
I know that had he have lived, they would have remained really close through the years. Now, Anson and Chad are close too, but it's a different kind of relationship. Anson likes different things than what Ethan liked. So once I just went on and asked the question I wanted to ask, things were fine. So I encourage people to, if there's something bothering you, and this is even if you haven't lost a child, or if you lost a child a really long time ago and anything comes up, don't wait. And I didn't do this, but 100%, don't go tell your girlfriend before you tell your husband what's bothering you.
Right.
Go straight to your spouse. Don't let it fester, because if you talk about it to somebody else first, it's going to grow into something that it wasn't even. And so I did tell him what I was worried about before I told anybody else. And I haven't gotten him to read the book. And so I'm a little nervous about when people start reading all this stuff, how he's going to feel about it. But I read the parts that I thought would bother him. He's like, "It's fine. It's fine." I'm like, "Are you sure it's fine?" Like, I even talk about when I run away. And he's like, "It's fine. It's fine." So
yeah.
We're going to see if it's really fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
But keep the couples together. Don't separate them. It doesn't need to be a guys and girls thing. It needs to be a together thing. And I hope that helps. I know if I ever get to be the one that shows up after something like this, I'm going to suggest that, because it was tough for us to learn to grieve together after weeks of being separated during the day. And we would hide our tears a lot. I don't know if every couple does that, because if we didn't hide our tears, if I saw him crying, I was going to cry. If he saw me crying, he was going to cry. So it's like we all cry enough. So do we just need to cry more? Should we have cried together more? I think we should have. I really do.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the best bits of advice that you just dropped there was, if you've got a problem or there's an issue between you and your husband, don't talk to your girlfriend about it. Because you're right, when we do that, we tend to build it up and blow it up more and more, and it makes us angry, and we need to talk to our spouse about it.
Exactly.
Not our friends. So that's good advice right there.
It just seems to grow, and it doesn't need to.
Yeah, exactly. This concludes the first half of my conversation with Joni Robbins. Be sure to come back next week, as we'll be extending our conversation to cover a wide variety of very practical topics related to child loss. Thanks again for listening, and I look forward to sharing the rest of our chat with you next Wednesday.